The difference between thinking and overthinking. Thinking is one of the greatest abilities we possess as human beings. It allows us to learn from our experiences, solve problems before they become crises, imagine possibilities that do not yet exist, and prepare for challenges that lie ahead. Every meaningful achievement in history began as a thought before it became a reality. Without the ability to think, humanity would never have progressed beyond survival. Our capacity for reflection, planning, creativity, and reason is what separates us from every other species on Earth. Thinking is not the problem. In fact, it is one of our greatest strengths. The problem begins when thinking quietly transforms into something entirely different without us noticing. The transition from healthy thinking to overthinking rarely happens all at once. It usually begins with something ordinary. A conversation leaves you wondering if you said the wrong thing. A delayed reply to a text message makes you question whether someone is upset with you. An important decision about your career, finances, or relationships causes you to pause before taking action. These situations naturally deserve some thought. Reflecting on your experiences helps you grow, and considering different options before making an important decision is often wise. Healthy thinking has a purpose. It gathers information, evaluates possibilities, and eventually leads you toward a conclusion. Once that conclusion is reached, your mind is free to move on. Overthinking follows a very different path. Instead of leading you toward clarity, it traps you inside an endless cycle of uncertainty. Rather than helping you reach a decision, it convinces you that one more round of analysis will finally provide the certainty you have been searching for. The same thoughts return again and again, often disguised as new insights, even though they are simply different versions of the same question. Hours may pass while your mind revisits the same conversation, imagines alternative outcomes, or rehearses situations that have not yet happened. The strange part is that all this mental activity creates the feeling that you are making progress. Your brain feels busy, and because it feels busy, it is easy to assume something productive must be happening. Yet when you step back, you often realize that nothing has changed except your level of exhaustion. One of the biggest misconceptions about overthinking is that it is a sign of intelligence. Many people proudly describe themselves as deep thinkers or analytical people, believing their constant mental activity is evidence of wisdom. While intelligence certainly involves the ability to think deeply, intelligence also involves recognizing when further analysis no longer adds value. The wisest people are not those who think forever. They are the ones who know when enough thinking has been done and when it is time to act. There comes a point where additional reflection no longer increases understanding. Instead, it simply delays movement. The difference between thinking and overthinking can be understood by imagining the difference between traveling and wandering. When you travel, every step takes you closer to your destination. Even if you occasionally stop to check your map or reconsider your route, you are still moving forward. Wandering without direction feels different. You continue walking, but you repeatedly find yourself back where you started. You expend energy, cover ground, and convince yourself that you are making progress, only to discover that you have been moving in circles the entire time. Overthinking works in much the same way. It creates the illusion of progress while quietly keeping you exactly where you began. This illusion is one of the reasons overthinking becomes so difficult to recognize. Your mind mistakes activity for achievement. Because you are constantly analyzing, evaluating, comparing, and imagining, it feels as though you are working toward a solution. In reality, healthy thinking eventually produces clarity, while overthinking usually produces confusion. Healthy thinking reduces uncertainty because it helps you understand the situation. Overthinking increases uncertainty because every answer creates two new questions. The more possibilities you imagine, the more difficult it becomes to believe that any decision could possibly be the right one. Much of this behavior can be traced back to the way the human brain evolved. For thousands of years, survival depended on recognizing danger before it became immediate. The individuals who paid attention to unusual sounds, changing weather, or unfamiliar movements in the environment were more likely to survive than those who ignored them. As a result, the human brain developed an extraordinary ability to anticipate potential threats. In the modern world, however, the threats have changed. Most people are no longer worrying about predators or food shortages. Instead, the brain directs the same survival mechanisms towards social situations, careers, finances, relationships, and imagined futures. A delayed email becomes evidence that something is wrong. An unanswered message becomes proof that someone is upset. A mistake at work becomes the beginning of a career disaster. Although none of these conclusions are based on certainty, the brain reacts as though they are genuine threats. The remarkable thing about the mind is that it often responds to imagined situations as though they are real. Simply imagining an embarrassing conversation can make your heart race. Imagining failure can fill your body with tension even when nothing has happened. This is because your nervous system responds more to perception than to objective reality. If your mind believes something is dangerous, your body prepares itself accordingly. In small doses, this response is useful because it helps you prepare for genuine challenges. When it becomes constant, however, it creates a life where imagined problems begin to feel just as real as actual ones. One of the greatest traps of overthinking is the belief that certainty is always just one more thought away. The mind convinces itself that if it analyzes the situation from another angle, asks one more question, or imagines one more possible outcome, complete confidence will finally appear. Unfortunately, life does not work that way. Most meaningful decisions are made without complete certainty. No one knows with absolute confidence whether accepting a new job will be the right choice, whether a relationship will succeed, whether moving to a new city will improve their life, or whether taking a risk will lead to success. Life has never offered guarantees, yet the overthinking mind continues searching for them as though they must exist somewhere just beyond its reach. This search eventually becomes exhausting because it asks the impossible of the human mind. It demands certainty in an uncertain world. It expects control over situations that involve countless variables outside your influence. It believes that enough thought can eliminate every possible mistake before any action is taken. The truth is that no amount of thinking can remove all uncertainty from life. At some point, every meaningful decision requires something thinking alone cannot provide. It requires trust. Trust that you will adapt if things do not go according to plan. Trust that mistakes can be corrected. Trust that experience will teach you what endless analysis never could. The greatest irony is that overthinking often prevents the very growth it seeks to protect. Confidence is not created by perfect decisions. Confidence is created by making decisions, learning from them, and discovering that you are capable of handling whatever follows. Every experience you avoid because you are waiting for certainty becomes an opportunity for growth that never arrives. The person who spends years planning never develops the confidence of the person who begins. The individual who endlessly rehearses conversations never gains the social confidence of someone willing to risk saying the wrong thing. Action, not endless reflection, is what teaches the mind that it is capable of navigating uncertainty. For this reason, the true difference between thinking and overthinking has very little to do with the amount of time you spend inside your own mind. It has everything to do with whether your thoughts are helping you move forward or quietly keeping you exactly where you are. Healthy thinking creates understanding, decisions, and progress. Overthinking creates hesitation, doubt, and paralysis. One expands your life. The other slowly shrinks it until the safest place becomes the prison of your own thoughts. If overthinking always felt painful from the beginning, very few people would continue doing it. The reason it becomes such a deeply ingrained habit is because it often disguises itself as responsibility. It convinces you that you are simply being careful, thorough, or prepared. It whispers that successful people think things through before acting and that making quick decisions is reckless. At first glance, that sounds reasonable. There is certainly wisdom in slowing down before making important choices. Reflection prevents impulsive decisions, and careful consideration often leads to better outcomes. The problem begins when preparation quietly transforms into avoidance. Somewhere along the way, thinking stops helping you prepare for life and starts protecting you from living it. Many people never realize this shift because overthinking creates the comforting illusion that something productive is happening. Sitting alone, replaying every possible outcome feels safer than taking the first step into uncertainty. It feels as though you are reducing risk when, in reality, you are simply postponing it. Life has a remarkable way of refusing to reveal its answers until you participate in it. There are countless lessons that cannot be learned through imagination alone. You cannot think your way into becoming a confident speaker without speaking. You cannot think your way into becoming a successful entrepreneur without eventually starting the business. You cannot think your way into understanding another person without having difficult conversations. Experience has always been life's greatest teacher, yet overthinking convinces you that more thought will somehow replace experience itself. This is why so many people spend years waiting for a feeling that never arrives. They wait until they feel completely ready before changing careers, starting a business, writing a book, moving to another country, asking someone on a date, or making any decision that carries uncertainty. Unfortunately, readiness is often misunderstood. People assume confidence comes before action when, in reality, confidence almost always follows action. Very few people begin something important believing they already have everything figured out. They begin because they understand that clarity is earned through movement, not through endless contemplation. Consider how children learn to walk. They do not spend months analyzing balance, reading books about movement, or imagining every possible way they might fall. They simply try. They fall repeatedly, adjust naturally, and eventually discover what works. Imagine if adults approached learning to walk the same way they approach many important decisions. We would still be sitting on the floor, waiting until we felt completely certain that we would never lose our balance. The very process that teaches us confidence would never begin because we would be waiting for confidence to exist before taking the first step. The adult mind often complicates what the child mind understands instinctively. Somewhere along the journey of growing older, many people begin believing that mistakes are evidence of failure instead of evidence of learning. Every wrong decision becomes something to avoid rather than something to learn from. Every setback becomes proof that they were not ready instead of proof that growth is taking place. Overthinking feeds this belief because it promises a future where mistakes can be eliminated entirely. It tells you that if you think long enough, prepare thoroughly enough, and analyze carefully enough, you will eventually discover the perfect path. That path does not exist. Every successful person you admire has made decisions without complete certainty. Every entrepreneur has invested time or money into ideas that did not work. Every writer has produced pages they later deleted. Every athlete has lost competitions. Every leader has made decisions they later questioned. The difference is not that they avoided uncertainty. The difference is that they accepted uncertainty as the price of progress. One of the most difficult truths about overthinking is that it quietly shifts your attention away from what you can control toward what you cannot. Healthy thinking asks practical questions. What information do I need? What options do I have? What is the next step? Once those questions have been answered, the mind naturally prepares to act. Overthinking asks entirely different questions. What if this goes wrong? What if people judge me? What if I regret this decision 5 years from now? What if something unexpected happens? These questions have one thing in common. They all focus on events that have not happened and, in many cases, may never happen. The human brain has an extraordinary imagination, but imagination is not always your ally. It has the ability to create vivid futures that feel completely real despite existing only in your mind. You imagine failing an interview before walking into the room. You picture people laughing at your presentation before you have spoken your first sentence. You convince yourself that one difficult conversation will permanently damage a relationship before either person has spoken a word. The body reacts to these imagined scenarios almost as strongly as if they were unfolding in real time. Your heart beats faster, your muscles tighten, your breathing becomes shallow. Anxiety begins to feel like evidence that something dangerous is about to happen, when in reality it is often nothing more than your imagination rehearsing a story. The danger is not imagination itself. Imagination has given humanity every invention, every scientific breakthrough, and every work of art ever created. The danger lies in forgetting that imagination can create disasters just as easily as it creates dreams. Left unchecked, the mind naturally gravitates toward worst-case scenarios because your brain evolved to prioritize survival over happiness. From an evolutionary perspective, it was safer to expect danger than to assume everything would be fine. That survival mechanism still exists today, even though many of the threats we face are psychological rather than physical. This explains why negative thoughts often seem louder than positive ones. Imagine receiving 100 compliments and one criticism. For many people, the criticism occupies their attention long after the compliments have been forgotten. This tendency is not a personal weakness. It is part of the brain's natural bias toward identifying potential threats. Unfortunately, overthinking magnifies this bias until it becomes the dominant lens through which life is viewed. Every uncertainty becomes a warning. Every possibility becomes a potential disaster. Every opportunity becomes a collection of risks waiting to unfold. There is another subtle consequence of overthinking that often goes unnoticed. It slowly erodes trust in yourself. Every time you refuse to make a decision because you are waiting for more certainty, you quietly send yourself a message that says, "I cannot handle uncertainty." Every time you seek endless reassurance before acting, you reinforce the belief that your own judgment is not enough. Over time, this creates dependence on external certainty rather than internal confidence. You begin believing that confidence comes from eliminating risk, instead of believing it comes from your ability to adapt. Real confidence has never meant knowing exactly how everything will unfold. Real confidence is believing that whatever happens, you will find a way to respond. It is not certainty about the future. It is trust in yourself. That distinction changes everything because it removes the impossible burden of predicting life before it happens. Instead of demanding guarantees, you begin developing resilience. Instead of asking whether you can avoid every mistake, you begin asking whether you can recover from them. The answer is almost always yes. Life has a way of rewarding movement. Doors rarely open for people who spend their lives standing outside wondering what might happen if they walked through them. Opportunities reveal themselves to those willing to participate, even imperfectly. The truth is that almost every meaningful achievement begins before complete confidence exists. People often assume successful individuals possess extraordinary certainty. In reality, many of them simply become comfortable acting while uncertainty is still present. They understand that waiting for fear to disappear often means waiting forever. Perhaps this is the greatest difference between healthy thinking and overthinking. Healthy thinking prepares you to engage with reality. Overthinking attempts to replace reality with endless mental rehearsal. One accepts that life must eventually be lived. The other keeps postponing life in the hope that certainty will eventually appear. Yet certainty remains as elusive tomorrow as it was yesterday. Meanwhile, time continues moving forward, indifferent to whether you have made up your mind. One day, almost without noticing, you realize that the years have passed, while your mind was still waiting for perfect clarity. That is the hidden cost of overthinking. It does not merely consume your thoughts, it quietly consumes your life. There is a question that few people ever stop to ask themselves, even though the answer has the power to change the way they approach every decision they make. The question is simple: what am I hoping to achieve by continuing to think about this? Most overthinkers assume the answer is clarity. They believe that if they continue analyzing the situation long enough, the correct decision will eventually reveal itself. But if they are honest with themselves, that is rarely what is happening. They are not searching for clarity as much as they are searching for certainty. Those two things are often confused, yet they are completely different. Clarity allows you to understand the situation well enough to move forward. Certainty demands guarantees that life has never been willing to provide. This is why overthinking becomes such a frustrating experience. The mind keeps asking questions that reality cannot answer in advance. It wants to know whether a relationship will last before allowing itself to become vulnerable. It wants proof that a business idea will succeed before risking time or money. It wants assurance that changing careers will lead to happiness before submitting a resignation letter. It wants certainty that every decision will work out perfectly before allowing you to take the first step. Life remains silent because those answers simply do not exist yet. They are discovered through experience, not prediction. Many people spend years waiting for a level of confidence that only action can create. They believe confidence is something you find before acting, when in reality it is something you build by acting despite uncertainty. Think back to any skill you have developed in your life. Whether it was learning to drive, speaking another language, cooking, managing people, or playing a sport, you probably felt uncertain in the beginning. Your first attempts were awkward. You made mistakes. You doubted yourself. Yet every repetition made the unfamiliar slightly more familiar. Every small success slowly replaced fear with trust. Eventually, something remarkable happened. The activity that once required intense concentration became almost automatic. Confidence did not arrive because you spent months imagining success. It arrived because repeated experience taught your brain that you were capable of handling what came next. This is one of the greatest lessons overthinking struggles to accept. The brain learns through evidence, not promises. Every time you successfully navigate uncertainty, you provide your mind with evidence that you are more capable than you believed. Every difficult conversation you survive, every challenge you overcome, every setback you recover from quietly strengthens your confidence. The opposite is also true. Every opportunity you avoid because you are waiting for certainty provides your brain with a different kind of evidence. It reinforces the belief that uncertainty is dangerous and should always be avoided. Without realizing it, avoidance becomes a habit. The world begins to feel smaller, not because opportunities disappeared, but because your comfort zone quietly became your entire world. Comfort is seductive because it rarely feels harmful in the moment. Staying where you are feels safe. Delaying the difficult conversation feels easier than risking conflict. Remaining in the familiar job feels less frightening than pursuing a career that excites you. Choosing not to apply for the promotion protects you from possible rejection. Each individual decision appears sensible on its own. The problem only becomes visible when you look back over months or years and realize that your life has remained exactly the same while your dreams quietly faded into the background. Overthinking rarely destroys a life in dramatic fashion. It does so gradually, one postponed decision at a time. There is a hidden emotional cost to this pattern that many people fail to recognize. Every unfinished decision occupies mental space. Every conversation you avoid continues living inside your mind. Every goal you delay quietly follows you into tomorrow. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as the tendency of the mind to hold on to unfinished tasks. Your brain naturally keeps returning to things that remain unresolved because it is trying to complete them. The longer something remains unfinished, the more attention it demands. Before long, your mental energy becomes consumed not by the life you are living, but by the life you have been postponing. This explains why overthinking is often so exhausting. It is not simply the number of thoughts that drain your energy. It is the number of unresolved thoughts competing for your attention at the same time. Imagine trying to carry 20 heavy bags at once. None of them may be impossible to lift individually, but together they become overwhelming. The same principle applies to the mind. Every unanswered question, delayed decision, unresolved conflict, and imagined future becomes another weight your thoughts are trying to carry. Eventually, even small problems begin to feel enormous because your mental resources have already been stretched to their limit. Ironically, many of the situations people overthink are resolved far more easily in reality than they ever were inside their imagination. A conversation you dreaded for weeks lasts 15 minutes. An interview that kept you awake at night turns out to be friendly and relaxed. The presentation you imagined would be a disaster receives positive feedback. Even when things do not go perfectly, they are rarely as catastrophic as your imagination predicted. This is because the mind has an extraordinary ability to exaggerate uncertainty when it lacks real information. In the absence of facts, it fills the gaps with stories. Unfortunately, those stories usually lean toward fear rather than possibility. Fear itself is not the enemy. Fear has an important purpose. It alerts you to genuine danger and encourages caution when caution is necessary. The problem begins when fear becomes the primary lens through which every decision is viewed. Instead of asking what could go right, the overthinking mind automatically asks what could go wrong. Instead of seeing opportunity, it sees potential loss. Instead of recognizing growth, it anticipates failure. This constant orientation toward risk creates a distorted picture of reality because it ignores an equally important truth. Positive outcomes are just as possible as negative ones, yet fear rarely gives them equal attention. Another reason analysis becomes paralysis is because overthinking creates the illusion that there is always more information available if you just keep searching. Modern technology has amplified this tendency. At any moment, you can read another article, watch another video, listen to another podcast, compare another opinion, or seek reassurance from another expert. Information has never been more accessible, yet clarity has never seemed more elusive. This is because information alone does not create wisdom. At some point, additional information stops helping you make better decisions and simply becomes another excuse to postpone making one. There is a subtle difference between preparation and procrastination that many people overlook. Preparation has an end point. You gather the information you need, consider your options, and then act. Procrastination disguised as preparation never reaches that final stage. It constantly finds another reason to delay. There is always one more book to read, one more course to complete, one more opinion to seek, one more week to wait. Because these activities appear productive, it becomes easy to justify them. Yet beneath them often lies the same emotion that fuels overthinking from the beginning, the desire to avoid uncertainty. Perhaps the most liberating realization is understanding that uncertainty is not a flaw in life. It is one of its defining characteristics. Every meaningful experience contains some degree of unpredictability. Falling in love is uncertain. Starting a family is uncertain. Building a business is uncertain. Changing careers is uncertain. Pursuing a dream is uncertain. If certainty became a requirement for action, almost nothing worthwhile would ever happen. Growth has always demanded a willingness to step into situations where the outcome cannot be fully controlled. As people grow older, they often believe wisdom comes from learning how to eliminate uncertainty. In reality, wisdom may be something much simpler. It is learning how to live peacefully alongside it. It is recognizing that not every question needs an immediate answer, not every decision requires perfect confidence, and not every fear deserves your attention. Wisdom is understanding that your ability to adapt is far more valuable than your ability to predict. The overthinking mind constantly asks, "What if this goes wrong?" A healthier mind eventually learns to ask a different question. "If this goes wrong, can I handle it?" That small shift changes everything. The first question assumes weakness. The second assumes capability. One keeps you trapped inside imagined disasters. The other reminds you of every challenge you have already survived. It places your attention not on what you cannot control, but on what has always been within your control, your ability to respond. When you begin to trust yourself more than your fears, something remarkable happens. Decisions become lighter. Mistakes become teachers instead of enemies. Uncertainty becomes an invitation rather than a threat. You stop waiting for perfect confidence because you realize confidence was never meant to come first. It was always meant to grow alongside courage, one imperfect decision at a time. One of the most revealing moments in a person's life is not when they realize they have been overthinking. It is when they realize how much of their life has quietly been shaped by it. Most people imagine overthinking as something that only appears during major decisions, such as choosing a career, ending a relationship, or making a financial investment. In reality, it slips into the smallest corners of everyday life. It influences what you say, what you choose not to say, the opportunities you pursue, the opportunities you avoid, and even the way you see yourself. Over time, it becomes less of a habit and more of an identity. People begin introducing themselves as someone who just overthinks everything, as though it is a permanent personality trait rather than a learned pattern of behavior. Once a person begins believing that overthinking is simply who they are, changing it becomes much more difficult because they are no longer trying to change a habit. They believe they are trying to change themselves. The truth is that overthinking is not your identity. It is a coping strategy. Somewhere along the way, your mind discovered that analyzing everything created the temporary feeling of safety. Every possibility considered, every conversation replayed, and every decision delayed gave you the comforting illusion that you were protecting yourself from future pain. The irony is that the protection slowly became its own source of suffering. The very mechanism designed to reduce anxiety eventually became one of its greatest causes. This is why recognizing when your mind has gone too far is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. Most people wait until they feel completely overwhelmed before acknowledging that something is wrong. By that point, they have already spent hours, days, or even weeks trapped inside the same cycle of thought. Learning to notice the early warning signs allows you to interrupt the process before it gathers momentum. Like a small snowball rolling down a mountain, overthinking is much easier to stop at the top than it is once it has become an avalanche. One of the earliest signs that your thinking has become unhealthy is repetition. Healthy thinking naturally moves forward because each new thought contributes something useful. You ask a question, gather information, consider your options, and gradually arrive at a conclusion. Overthinking feels very different. You begin noticing that your thoughts are no longer producing anything new. You replay the same conversation for the 10th time. You revisit the same decision from the same angle. You imagine the same future scenario over and over again. Although the thoughts may appear different on the surface, they are simply variations of the same fear. Your mind is no longer searching for answers. It is simply repeating itself. Imagine listening to your favorite song. The first few times you hear it, you notice the lyrics, the melody, and the emotion behind the music. Now imagine that the song becomes stuck on a single line. That one sentence repeats endlessly without ever moving to the next verse. What was once enjoyable quickly becomes irritating. Eventually, the repetition itself becomes unbearable. The mind behaves in much the same way. Thoughts that refuse to move forward eventually lose their usefulness. Instead of creating understanding, they create mental exhaustion. Another sign that your mind has gone too far is when thinking begins replacing action. There is a natural rhythm to healthy decision-making. Reflection is followed by movement. You think, you decide, and you act. Overthinking interrupts this rhythm. Reflection becomes an endless destination rather than a temporary stage. You continue preparing long after preparation is necessary. You continue researching long after you have enough information. You continue imagining possibilities long after the next step has become obvious. The longer this continues, the more intimidating action becomes because your mind has built it into something far larger than it really is. Many people assume that action requires confidence, but confidence often grows because of action. These misunderstanding traps countless people in a cycle of hesitation. They tell themselves they will start once they feel ready. The problem is that readiness rarely arrives through waiting. Imagine learning to swim by reading books about swimming for years without ever entering the water. You may understand every stroke in theory, but your body will never learn what your mind already knows until you step into the pool. Life follows the same principle. Experience teaches lessons that thought alone never can. Another warning sign appears when your thoughts begin affecting your physical well-being. The mind and body have never been separate systems. They constantly communicate with one another. A stressful thought can increase your heart rate. Anxiety can tighten your muscles. Worry can interrupt your sleep. When overthinking becomes chronic, the body begins carrying the weight of thoughts that never seem to end. You may wake up already feeling tired because your mind has been working all night. Your shoulders remain tense without you noticing. Your breathing becomes shallow. Headaches appear more frequently. Your body quietly absorbs the emotional burden your mind has created. Sleep often becomes one of the first casualties of overthinking. During the day, distractions compete for your attention. Work, conversations, responsibilities, and daily routines provide temporary relief from your thoughts. At night, those distractions disappear. The room becomes quiet, but your mind becomes louder. What should be a time of recovery turns into another opportunity for mental rehearsal. Conversations are replayed. Future problems are imagined. Decisions are reconsidered. Ironically, many of the thoughts that seem urgent at midnight lose their importance entirely by morning. Yet in the moment, they feel impossible to ignore. One reason this happens is because fatigue changes the way the brain processes information. When you are tired, emotional centers within the brain become more active while the areas responsible for rational decision-making become less effective. In simple terms, everything feels bigger at night. Small concerns appear overwhelming. Minor mistakes seem catastrophic. Ordinary uncertainty feels unbearable. Recognizing this pattern can be surprisingly freeing. Not every thought deserves immediate attention simply because it arrived. Sometimes the wisest decision is not to solve the problem at 2 o'clock in the morning, but to allow yourself to rest and revisit it with a clearer mind the following day. Overthinking also begins affecting relationships in subtle ways. Instead of listening to what people actually say, you begin analyzing what they might have meant. Silence becomes rejection. A delayed reply becomes evidence that someone is angry. A neutral facial expression becomes proof that you have done something wrong. Your imagination fills the gaps left by incomplete information, and because the brain naturally leans toward caution, those gaps are often filled with negative assumptions. The tragic part is that many conflicts created by overthinking exist only inside the mind of the person experiencing them. Entire arguments are fought internally without the other person even knowing they are taking place. This habit can quietly damage relationships because people eventually respond to stories rather than reality. You withdraw from someone because you assume they no longer value you. You become defensive because you believe criticism is coming. You apologize for things that never offended anyone. Without realizing it, your behavior begins responding to imagined situations instead of genuine ones. The relationship suffers not because of what happened, but because of what you believed might have happened. Another indication that your mind has gone too far is the constant search for reassurance. There is nothing wrong with seeking advice from people you trust. Wisdom often comes through conversation. The problem arises when reassurance becomes addictive. You ask one friend what they think, then another, then another. Each person offers an opinion, but instead of feeling calmer, you become more confused because every new perspective introduces another possibility to consider. Reassurance provides temporary relief, but like many forms of relief, it quickly fades. Before long, the uncertainty returns, and you find yourself searching for someone else to tell you what to do. This pattern slowly weakens your relationship with yourself. Instead of trusting your own judgment, you begin outsourcing every important decision to other people. Confidence is replaced by dependence, yet no amount of external reassurance can permanently silence internal doubt. The only lasting solution is learning to trust your own ability to make decisions, accept uncertainty, and adapt when life unfolds differently than expected. Perhaps the clearest sign that your mind has gone too far is when thinking no longer improves your life. Instead of creating clarity, it creates confusion. Instead of bringing peace, it creates tension. Instead of helping you move forward, it keeps you standing still. At that moment, the problem is no longer the decision in front of you. The problem is the relationship you have developed with your own thoughts. The encouraging news is that awareness changes everything. The moment you recognize that your mind has become trapped in a loop is the moment you create space for a different choice. You do not have to believe every thought that enters your mind. You do not have to solve every uncertainty before taking action. Most importantly, you do not have to wait until fear disappears before living your life. The goal has never been to think less. The goal is to think well, to recognize when reflection has served its purpose, and to have the courage to close the mental loop before it quietly becomes another prison. You've just listened to Chapter 1 of the Truth About Overthinking. This is only the beginning. The journey ahead explores why your brain is wired to worry, how overthinking quietly shapes your decisions, relationships, and future, and most importantly, how you can break free from the mental patterns that keep you stuck. The early chapters build on the distinction between healthy thinking and overthinking, showing how endless analysis creates hesitation while action builds confidence. If this chapter challenged the way you think, imagine what the rest of the book will reveal. The complete book is available now in paperback, ebook, and audiobook, Spotify, Google Play Books, and Apple Books. Continue your journey with the Truth About Overthinking by PeteB. Stop overthinking, start living.